Good morning, Truckee. Can you say hot, boys and girls? Because it's a cooker out there. Yesterday, our deck showed 97 degrees, which is, I just couldn't believe it. And inside was just a little bit cooler, even all the windows open. So thanks for joining us again for another program put on by the Truckee Chamber of Commerce. To my right is Lynn, the chief boss, to be redundant, and an upgrade, Teddy Owens over here to my left, who's usually out in the audience, has somehow managed to get up there at the front desk with the big kids.
Got a raise.
Yeah, and he'll probably be sitting where I am next week, so I'm a little nervous because
that won't happen.
He's got more talent than I do. So thanks to Rory and the team at Tahoe Truckee Media for filming this. And by the way, word is that we may be back in business at the airport in September. So we'd have one more meeting here and then go do live performance. So get ready, and we'll see you there in September, which is not next time. So I want to introduce and thank our sponsors. Very important. Tall Forest Health System, Porter Simon, Dixon Realty, Tall Truckee Community Foundation in the 5 Auerbach Engineering, JK Architecture Engineering, which is our newest, Tall Truckee Media, Sierra Sun Moonshine Inc., 101.5 FM, the great town of Truckee, and the Truckee Tahoe Airport District. So, and our committee that puts this on, I do, frankly and modestly, I do most of the work. Yeah, okay.
Sorry, I didn't mean to laugh.
Thank you. Thank you for breaking the silence, calling me out on that. But Lynn Saunders is our key person, and chamber staff, Ruth Garrissey, Melissa Williams, and Carolina Pacheco, who unfortunately is leaving us and has got a job she's really looking forward to. Kelly Cutler from CAT, Naomi Elegado, Moonshine Inc., Ernie Grossman, great guy, Ernie Grossman, Gerald Herrick, Fire Department, Tony Lashbrook, the great Tony Lashbrook, who doesn't like me teasing him, I'll say that, Deb Ryan, the Community Foundation, and little Teddy Owens, or big Teddy Owens, to my left at the Tahoe Forest Health System. So let's do this.
supply system. So we're not providing any water deliveries from surface water, the Donner Lake, Truckee River, or any of the drinking water retention basins you see to the north of us, Prosser Lake, Stampede, or Boca. So we are exclusively a groundwater supply system from the Martis Valley Aquifer. And we're talking about the impacts of drought this morning. We familiar with a few years back in 2014 and 15, we entered a similar situation with statewide emergency drought situation. And like then in 2014 and 15, we currently aren't experiencing any water shortage condition here in our basin. In a little bit, some of the future slides here will provide a little bit more information of what that looks like in terms of the data. But the question is, what can we do during a drought situation while the rest of the state or the western states here in the United States are experiencing drought and some water supply shortage issues? What can we do here in the community of Truckee? Well, everyone should always conserve water. We need to be responsible stewards of our resource and use water responsibly in terms of our irrigation practices and our internal use practices. We do have some tools available for you on our website, truckeedonnerpud.org, for those who are looking for additional information on how to maybe retro. While we weren't in a water shortage condition, it did change our behaviors, and we could see that in overall water use. So you can see, going back to 2006, where we had our peak daily usage, and a continuous gradual reduction into 2014. That drought, like I said, changed some of our behavior. We've sustained that over the last few years, and we can see now the last couple of years it's starting to creep up a little bit, and this is a good opportunity for us as a community to really revisit this topic and remind ourselves on what our responsibilities are here. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, one of the big drivers in water use reduction, has been aggressive main replacement. This is equated to, over the last 10 years, approximately 1 million gallons per day in water use reduction, or water loss, essentially. And that sounds staggering, but really what that is, it's about 600 gallons per minute that previously would be either unaccounted for or lost through leaks, and we reduced that through our consistent and aggressive water main replacement program. So that's when we talk about the rate studies over the last decade or so, where we've increased rates incrementally. A lot of that rate-driven capital replacement has been water mains over the years, and you can see the net effect there. Other drivers in water use reduction or conservation have been the fact that Northern California is now required to be a metered, our potable water, drinking water systems are now required to be metered. And that metering creates, it makes us aware of our water use patterns. And once we become aware of those, we can modify those, and we've really seen the effects there over the last 10 years. We're essentially fully metered now. It says 97% there, but we're probably at that 99.9. We have a few sections we need to meter, but we're pretty close to that. And then we began billing in 2011 based on volumes, and that was an important milestone for responsible water use. As you see your bill, in the past, it would be just a flat rate. Now it's metered based on, or it's billed based on volume. So it's also changed all of our behavior patterns. We do continue to have customer water conservation programs. We ask that you go to our website and we're looking for a final rulemaking next year, 2022, and then an implementation in 2024. So we will be proactive in our public outreach to make sure everyone's aware of this. Next slide, please. I want to hand it off to Mike Stoudemire with the Northstar Community Services District.
Let me, thanks, Brian. Let me introduce Mike. So Mike Stoudemire is the general manager of the Northstar Community Services District. He's been the general manager there for 17 years, and he's the best, the absolute best. The district serves the Northstar region in addition to Lahontan, Martis Camp, Schaefer's Mill, and Hopkins Village. Mike Stoudemire, take it away with your fancy hat.
Thanks, Jim. What you're looking at here is a kind of an aerial view looking from above the airport to the southwest with Northstar's mountain in the top of the map and the valley, Martis Valley in the bottom. We have two systems. In terms of the water systems, the original Northstar system in yellow, and then we acquired the Martis Valley water system in 2015 from Placer County Water Agency. And so these two systems, although they're tied together physically, there's a valve there that remains closed. We call that an emergency intertie. There's also two connections to the PUD system on the Martis Valley water system system side that are the same in terms of emergency intertie, allow us to exchange water in the case of some water shortage or water quality issues. So those are there in place in case we need them. We haven't had to use them, so that's a good thing. But I'm going to drill into the nuances of each system because they are quite a bit different. If you go to the next slide, please. So on the Northstar side, we have about 2,000 existing connections. Originally, there was about 3,600 entitled. That number is coming down quite a bit by a few hundred units, so we won't see that full build-out, which is a good thing from a water supply standpoint, since all the water supply infrastructure is that was contemplating 3,600 units is now in the ground, so we have a little surplus in capacity from that standpoint. But the nuance of this system is that we do have two sources of water, surface water and groundwater. As Brian mentioned, the PUD is 100% groundwater, and as you'll hear from Mike Geary, that's the same thing in Olympic Valley. With the surface water, what that comprises of is a couple of spring collection galleries up at the mid-mountain area of Northstar, and they feed into a water treatment plant. We also own a lake, a reservoir, 180-acre impoundment up on the mountain that we can utilize as well, and we have water rights that we share with the resort to allow for snowmaking and water domestic use as well. And so that water up on the mountain gets collected through these various infrastructure systems, and then is treated through a microfiltration water treatment plant, and then gravity feeds into the rest of the community. What we look at specifically in terms of surface water are two spring systems, the Big Spring system, which is the main one, and then Sawmill Flat Springs. So we watch those levels in terms of the flow rates, and Big Springs typically runs in the 300 to 700 gallons per minute. Sawmill Flat a bit less than that. Somewhat interesting to folks in this business is the age of the water, meaning when it fell to the ground as precipitation until we extract it and put it into production. And we've had the water age dated, and in the case of the surface water, it's generally less than 3 years old, which has an impact in terms of supply when you encounter dry periods as we're in now, and you'll see that in some of the graphs I'll be displaying. On the groundwater side, we've got two different production wells. We call them TH2 and TH1, built in 06 and in 2013, respectively. They're about 850 GPM each, and they're located down in the golf course area in the lower portion of Martis Valley, and about 850 feet deep as well, through several layers of thick bedrock. And that water, when we age date it, is in excess of 1,000 years old, which has a nice advantage when it comes to trying to weather these longer-term droughts, as you'll see again in some of the graphs. So kind of an interesting nuance I like to point out when we're looking at water supply in times of drought. Next slide, please. So on the Martis Valley water system, again, we serve Lahontan, Martis Camp, Schaefer's Mill, Hopkins Village, as well as the school and the new employee housing building going on out there. I think we're up to about 1,500 existing connections, 1,700 at build out. We've got 3 primary groundwater wells, 1, 2, and then a third one, well 3, 1,250 gallons per minute. So they're for the big 2, and then about 200 for well 3. So there's some pretty robust wells. Again, in the Martis Valley aquifer and the groundwater basin, pretty deep, 800 plus feet through bedrock. Next slide, please. So if we look at production over the past 10 years, since 2010, on this slide, you're looking at what we've done. And again, I want to apologize for some of the graphs. We're all engineers up here, and we kind of like to geek out on this. But this has been, as transparent as we can with the folks that are customers in terms of what we're seeing. And here you go. So over the years, we've seen some pretty good oscillation here. But generally, like Brian has seen, we've seen, a fairly steady rate of annual production. What's interesting to some on this graph would be the bifurcation of the blue and the orange. The blue being the what we call the surface water component, and the orange and the beige being the groundwater component. And so over the years, we've been trying to rely more on the surface water as much as we can, and you can kind of see that percentage grow in terms of the use allocation of total water production. And the reasons we do that are because of the fact that, first of all, that water on the hill allows us to take advantage of gravity. We don't have to pump it 800 feet out of the ground and then another 1,000 or so feet up the hill. Water is a heavy material. It takes a lot of energy to move around, so the less pumping we can do, the better from an energy perspective. And then again, since it's younger water, it is if we don't use it, it just kind of flushes out. Whereas the groundwater, if we use it, it goes away. And so we try to preserve that groundwater as much as we can to kind of allow us to be a little more drought resilient. Next slide, please. Here we are at the Martis Valley water system, annual production past 10 years, and you can see a different trend here with a steady increase. 19 to 20 was a pretty big hop, and I think a lot of that was kind of pandemic driven, with a lot of folks moving up to secondary houses for permanent or primary residency, and beyond that, we've just seen steady growth in the communities over there, and lots of permits. This year alone, I think we've seen over 100 already. So we can probably project that next year this trend line will continue to increase. Next slide, please. And so this is the Big Springs collection monthly flow for the past 10 years. The beige areas, or the shaded areas on your screen, indicate the drought period. So you can see the last drought in 12 to 15 or 16. We saw a fairly steady decline, and then as soon as we get precipitation, the water flows jump right back up to on the top of the blue line is the depth, 0 at the top of the screen being ground level, so depth to the water level in the well when it's static, meaning not on, and then the bottom of the blue is the water level when the pump is turned on. So you can see a pretty good up and down. The first couple years you're seeing a general trend line because this is when the well was initially put into production until it stabilized. And then you can see that it pretty much rides right through the last drought without seeing a lot of decline. Again, this is that old water in excess of 1,000 years old and seems to be fairly drought resilient. And then as water supply and precipitation pick up, so do the water levels, and we're seeing a good, healthy aquifer response to the drought so far in this current cycle. Next slide, please. And this would be well number 2 over on the Martis Valley well, or Martis Valley water system side. A little data gap in the middle there, but very similar kind of trend. A little bit more of a downward trend. I think this is due to production levels being, kind of increasing, as you saw on the previous slide with the build out to the community, but still a pretty resilient system there as well. I might add on the TH2 front, if we stop using that well, it actually starts coming out of the ground in an artesian fashion. So it's a pretty robust aquifer, again, coming out of the Martis Valley groundwater basin. Next slide, please. So what are we doing here to kind of incentivize conservation and efficient use of water? Well, we've have a water rate study that designed into it tiered rates in monthly billing, meaning that you are the more water you use, the more water or the more you pay. And so those that are being very efficient with their water use will have a lower monthly bill, and those that aren't will pay more. We installed smart meters with cellular endpoints, which is 100% deployed in our system for over about 10 years now. And what this does is it provides near real-time analytics to water use and allows customers to have their own portal and visibility into their own water use. And probably most importantly, it provides advanced leak detection and text alerts. The days of showing up to your cabin on Christmas and to open your door to find an ice castle inside due to a water leak are no longer happening because of technology like this, especially with the demographic we have with second homeowners that aren't always there. If you're logged into the system or if you're signed up for the system, you'll get an email or text within 24 hours of any detected leak. And our customer service team at Northstar will also alert folks that aren't signed up as well for these leak detections. We similarly have rebates and handouts, incentivize lower efficient water appliances and turf replacement and whatnot as the PUD. We also are looking into installing and partway through this what we call district metered areas. So this is doing our part on the district side of the plumbing to look at where we might be experiencing leaks on our system side. And so we install meters to bifurcate the system into components and look at the production losses that occur, and are able to finally navigate towards where those leaks may be and replace them. And through technology like this, we're able to reduce our system loss to under 5% of total production, and it's probably even less than that. So all important pieces of technology and customer behavior to be not just good water conservation folks, but also just keep the fact that we need to be efficient with our water use no matter what we're doing. So I'm going to let the next speaker talk. I think it's Mike Geary.
Now it's time for the other Mike. All right. Mike Geary is the general manager from there for about 10 years. Previously, he served as their director of public works, and prior to that was the chief engineer for the Northstar Public Utility District, and actually also worked at the Northstar Community Services District. So please welcome the very talented Mike Geary.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Lynn, for letting us talk about an important issue this year, and appreciate the opportunity to put the message out there to get the community's help to deal with this issue and reduce our water consumption. Little background on the newly named Olympic Valley Public Service District. We're a county water district. We were formed in 1964. So creeping up on 60 years of being around. Our service area is about 15 square miles. Annual budget is about $8.2 million. We can serve anywhere from 2,500 on peak ski days. We have about 750 service connections, and we serve residential properties, businesses, lodging, schools, of course the ski resort, a couple of churches, and the mixed-use village up in Squaw Valley. Our existing water production is about 450 acre feet annually, or 150 million gallons. We provide water to about 3/4 of the consumers in Squaw, in Olympic Valley. The remainder being served by a mutual water company. The other demands on the aquifer are for snowmaking and golf course irrigation. On a whole, water pumped from the aquifer equals about 850 acre-feet annually, and we've maxed that out at 1,000 historically. Next slide, please. So how does the system work? You know, the metaphor that works most of the time for our water system is that of a bathtub. You know, and so we have 3 sides of the tub, and those are the mountains that surround the aquifer. It's drained by Squaw Creek, which exits the valley on the east, but it fills the aquifer, fills the bathtub high enough for it to discharge to Squaw Creek. And the pumpers in the valley, as I said, are the Mutual Water Company, the resort at Squaw Creek. They pump from the aquifer to irrigate their golf course, and then also have an agreement to provide snowmaking water in the winter to the ski resort. The ski resort pumps for snowmaking, and Plumpjack and the Polson family, they have small wells that are used for irrigation on their properties. Here you have an aerial view of Olympic Valley, and the dots you're seeing on the screen there, I know they're hard to see, but those all represent either production wells or monitoring wells throughout the aquifer. So we have a good handle on the hydrology in the aquifer. We're monitoring levels throughout the aquifer, as well as taking even more data on the wells that we use for production. Next slide, please. Thanks. So the source is snowfall, rainfall. Our supply is 100% from groundwater, and that enters into the alluvial Olympic Valley through deep percolation and surface water infiltration. It's very dynamic. It fills annually, and when it does, it then rises. The elevation of the aquifer rises to a point where it then discharges to Squaw Creek. It has historically filled every year. We're at risk if there's lower levels of precipitation coupled with higher water demand. Our outflows are from pumping, as we discussed, and of course discharge to Squaw Creek. You can see in the graph there that we do measure and monitor our rainfall. Our 56-year average is 53 inches annually as rain. Next slide, please. Thanks. Here we have a graph from a draft water management action plan. This is our drought response plan in Olympic Valley. And so we get together under the umbrella of our Olympic Valley groundwater management plan. We put together a groundwater management plan back in about 2007, 2008, and we pulled together all the pumpers in the valley to collaborate and to coordinate. And this is an outcome of that collaboration. It's our drought response plan that we collectively will work towards implementing. And what you're seeing on the graph in the yellow triangles is our estimated pumping water level. And this is from one of our wells. And the dotted line, you'll see AL1, that's action level 1, and AL2, that's action level 2. And then CL, the red line, right at that 6150 elevation, that's the critical level. The blue shaded area is the screen interval in this well. And what we're doing here is we're trying to identify the elevation, the groundwater elevation in the aquifer. If it gets, what is too low is the question we're asking. And this is a question we determine for every one of our wells, because each well is different. Each well has a different depth. Our wells vary in depth from 75 to 150 feet. This is much different than Martis Valley that has well depths in the range of 700 to 800 feet deep. So we're looking at what the depth of the well is, where in the well we have screens to let the groundwater into it, and where the motor and the pump intake is in the well. And we are looking to, number one, keep the water levels above the screen intervals, and more importantly, making sure that the water level is higher than our pump motor and our pump intake. These are designed to work as submerged. And so when the water levels get so low that this isn't happening, we're going to hit a critical level. And that's what we're doing on the ground to determine the impacts of drought on our system and our ability to continue to provide water. Next slide, please. Thank you. Here we have our water production over the last 30 years, and we've combined our data with that of the Squaw Valley Mutual Water Company. Their water consumption is seen in red and the PSDs in blue. So this is going back 30 years, back to 1990, and you can see that our peak production is in the year 2000. I find this to be fascinating because it was in 2000 that the village, the Intra-West Village in Olympic Valley, came online and was built and quickly sold. And after that, you have this huge development in 2000, we see a water reduction. And I think that has a lot to do with the implementation by the district of its water conservation program. I think it has a lot to do with more efficient plumbing fixtures and building codes. And you can see this downward trend. We have an uptick in 2013. Again, in the data, 2015 shows the effects of the conservation measures implemented by the state. Lynn also asked us to talk about any potential impacts from a higher level of visitors and residents as a result of the pandemic. And we're not seeing that in our data in Olympic Valley. You can kind of see that we've highlighted that in years 2019 and 20, and it's really not that much more, the numbers aren't that much higher than what you see in 2017 and 18. Next slide, please. Here we have a graph from the water supply assessment that we conducted pursuant to Senate Bill 610 and for the village at Squaw Valley specific plan in 2014. And then we updated it in 2015 as a result of the 5-year drought we were coming to an end of. For each month, you can see on the left-hand side our existing demand, and on the right-hand side for every month, what that demand looks like at build-out. You have different colors in there representing our production. The light blue, it would be the increased demand from the village project. The hashed blue would be new demands outside of the project within our service area. You can see the Mutual Water Company's demands there, as well as snowmaking and irrigation demands by month as well. And so these demands, how they change monthly, is critical for us because of how the hydrology and the aquifer works. We are flush with water after that first big storm that we hopefully get in October, November, sometimes as late as December, this past year as late as January. But we see that aquifer fill up, and then it maxes out in May when we stop seeing the storms, but we see our highest demands in July and August. So those are critical months for us, and we're watching aquifer levels very carefully at that time. I'm watching the clock. We are kind of getting short on time, so I'll try to speed up here. Next slide, please. Here we have a graph that's similar to what Mike showed you here. The vertical lines are years, and this goes back to 2013 and up through 2021. What you should focus on is the top line. That's the aquifer level at our well that we're monitoring here. You can see it's high at the beginning of the year and then starts slowly decreasing when we stop getting precipitation, and towards the end of the year we're getting low, and then it spikes back up typically, like I said, November, December, when we get those first storms. Next slide, please. What are we doing? We have our groundwater management plan, as I mentioned, in 2007. This is a great structure for the pumpers in the valley to come together and collaborate and address critical issues like a water shortage like we're experiencing now. Within our water code, we have a water conservation program that identify 3 stages of drought, and these include 3 different levels of response by both the district and our customers to address drought. I talked about the Water Management Action Plan. That's a response based on each well and how it's doing, and that would trigger different drought responses. We have a robust leak detection notification. We're sending out postcards to our residents if we're seeing water being consumed over a 24-hour period. And we have an inverted block rate structure so that those consuming higher volumes of water are paying for it, as Mike Stoudemire mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. And it goes back to you, Brian.
If we have a little bit of time, real quick, what does this all mean? And so, as Mike pointed out in Olympic Valley, and the other Mike with Northstar, in our basin, Martis Valley Groundwater Basin, we participate in extensive monitoring, and so we call it the science of the basin. Essentially, as Mike pointed out in his graphics in Squaw Valley, we use monitoring wells and our own production wells to monitor the health of the basin. And here I have on the screen a list of studies going back to 1995, and it kind of illustrates for us all that the basin is extensively studied. And most recently, in 2016, in collaboration with the Truckee Donner PUD, Northstar Community Services District, and Placer County Water, we conducted a sustainability study here in the basin, and you can see that the numbers there of 22,000 acre feet a year. And what the relevance of that is that's what the estimated yield, safe yield of our basin on an annual basis for groundwater pumping. But if we look at, if you could pull the next slide up. If we look at the actual pumping that's being conducted in our basin, historically, 1990 to 2014, it's been about 7,000 acre feet a year. So I just spoke about 22,000 acre feet as a safe, sustainable yield, while all of the pumpers in the basin collectively are only pumping 7,000 acre feet. It paints a picture that while we are, we suffer the drought conditions like the rest of the state, our basin is very rich, and it's been proven through science that it can sustain long-term droughts based on our current usage. That doesn't mean that we as a community or as a region need to just throw caution to the wind on our water usage. It still means we need to be responsible in our use and preserve that sustainability and store that for future use. Next slide, please. Mike talked about the monitoring wells in the Olympic Valley. Here's a graphic of the collaborative work we've done with Placer County and Northstar and the PUD in monitoring Martis Valley Basin water levels. And what you can see here, with the exception of a couple of anomalies there in the center, is a relatively flat graphic. And that represents the fact that we have a very dependable recharge in the basin. Our usage is well below the sustainable yield, and the water levels are maintaining. They're flatlining, so to speak. And so we don't have an overall deficit or issue with overdraft in our larger basin. Next slide. And so real quickly, just wanted to touch on what some of the latest news is in the drought that we may see in our news cycles as we progress through the summer. Recently, Governor Newsom issued an executive order on July 8th, and it was essentially a voluntary conservation order of 15% below 2020 water usage. That's a statewide executive order. We have seen some emergency action already taking place in some of the lower watersheds down in the Central Valley. You see the Russian River and the Bay Delta water rights have some emergency restrictions and regulations already. And there's a statewide notification for all public water systems to really begin to they should have already had it, but to begin to prepare to use their water shortage contingency plans, as Mike pointed out, some of the water management plans to make sure we have actions to take if we experience some effects of the drought. Next slide. I think we're open to questions, and perhaps Mike Stoudemire might have some more information on the data.
So thank you, Brian and Mike 1 and Mike 2. Last last part of the presentation answered some of my questions. It's the big picture of sustainability. But we have more questions. I see Teddy over here feverishly writing down your questions. And so, Ted, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is a general question for all three of you, and it has to do with PSOM's public safety outage management. You know, the threat of electricity being shut off for fire protection, public safety. How are you preparing for PSOMs? Would it impact your water delivery, and how long can you sustain without power?
Short answer, and a system to resupply the fuel to those generators such that we shouldn't experience any kind of water delivery disruptions, even an extended period of power outage.
Is your water supply in the mountain gravity fed?
It is, but it still takes to run the plant, not as much as the wells, but that has a backup generator as well.
Okay. Brian?
Yeah, essentially, backup generators has been the primary technique, so to speak, or mitigation measure for power outages. The PUD's been investing extensively over the last 11 years on generators across our system to make sure that we can provide water, fire flows, and potable drinking water during an outage.
Thank you. Mike?
I have the same response. You know, we have generators at our critical facilities that'll ensure delivery, keep those tanks topped off, and test drive them weekly.
Very good. And while you have the mic, I have a question for you. Does Olympic Valley have any plans for alternative water sources?
We did a study in 2014 called the Redundant Water Study, and we identified a preferred alternative to construct what would be a emergency intertie through a connection from either Northstar CSD or Truckee Donner PUD. That project was estimated to cost $25 to $30 million. Upon completion of that analysis, the direction from our board was to keep that as our preferred alternative, and to work with other utility districts to possibly construct a joint trench that distance between Truckee and Olympic Valley, work with developers that would benefit from sort of address
The three of you did a really good job in answering the questions that had been coming in. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jim, and we'll get back on track. Thank you.
Lynn, do you have any questions?
Well, this was touched upon. Does the increased monitoring near Middle Martis Creek appear adequate for determining late summer effects of pumping on surface flows?
I'll try to answer that. It's probably a water supply standpoint. We feel that it gives us the gauge to understand what's happening generally in the aquifer, which is what we pay attention to as a purveyor. If your perspective is more focused on surface water flows or interaction with streams and whatnot, it may not be, but from a purely water supply, water purveyor perspective, it is.
Okay. First came to town in the early 70s.
1870.
Yeah, 1870s.
1870s.
Tahoe Donner had a pipeline in Donner Lake, and that was to be the primary source of water for Tahoe Donner. It didn't go so well, so there's a lot of local opposition. So here's another oddball question, curiously from me. Does water grow stale, like water in a well or water in an aquifer, or even water in a shelf in a plastic container in a store?
I think that's several different situations there. So in terms of in the aquifer, the aquifer such as the Martis Valley Basin Aquifer is a rich filtration system. It is essentially the most effective filtration system we could have. With respect to water in a container, yes. And so we don't recommend that folks keep water stored in plastic containers. The general rule of thumb is every year you should replace that unless you're going to treat it with some sort of drop system or treatment. But generally, you'd want to recycle that water out, water your plants with it and refill it. But our aquifers don't go stale. We like to say it grows better with age like wine, but it is a filtration system that works quite effectively.
Jim, I've got a nuanced one on that, in that when it's in the tanks, it can grow stale if it's not being used. And to put it bluntly, we actually benefited from having more year-round customers in our constituency taking demand as a result of recent pandemic moves and whatnot by, keeping a more year-round demand cycle going, as opposed to what we used to see in the past with big, low occupancy spring, fall kind of times when the water in the tanks was could become somewhat stale and was an operational issue to contend with.
Yeah. Is the general that if we continue to have water monitoring and water reduction programs, that we have adequate water in the Martis Aquifer to serve our community into the future?
I'll say yes to that. Knows what the future will bring, but what we've seen in the data and the science that we've accumulated versus what the production levels where we're at, as long as we continue to be good stewards of the water and use it efficiently, I think we're in a unique situation, particularly in California, where we don't need to rely 100% on what happens during the winter. I think Olympic Valley is a little bit nuanced from that, given their system and their basin, but from the Martis Valley Basin side, we get first dibs at that water, and it's there for us to take if we need it. And if we don't use it, it stays there. It doesn't just flow away. And so it's a resource to celebrate and protect.
That's good to hear. Good to hear. And I want to thank our three great presentations. Timely topic, of course, and keep up the good work. Lynn, do we have any stump speeches, any announcements to make?
I do. Carolina, can you put that slide up? So as we touched upon earlier, we've all been notified that NV off the power in extreme fire risk areas during wildfire season. So businesses and residents are being urged to prepare for these potential prolonged power outages. The Chamber is partnering with the town, the county, the PUD, the downtown merchants, and Visit Truckee online virtual town hall on July 20th from 8:30 to 10:30, and you can learn more about it and register at, it's a bit.ly link, bit.ly/Truckee Power. So we're going to have some businesses and people that are on the western part of the county that experienced this last year with PG&E's PSPS, the power outages that they experienced. So they'll share real life lessons as far as what they wish they had done to prepare better, what they did, what worked, what didn't work. And I think it's really crucial for all businesses to attend this. So again, it's July 20th, 8:30 to 10:30. Go to bit.ly/Truckee Power to register. And I have one more. Also, save the date, September 24th. It's a Friday for the Truckee Chamber's 68th Annual Awards event, and we're going to hold it at the Truckee Airport in one of the hangars. Plenty of space to spread out, fresh air, scenic views, bring the community back together, and that's kind of our theme. Come back, come together. So Chamber members should have received an email, so you can nominate your peers in 6 different categories. These are highly regarded awards, and so we urge you to take the time to make that nomination. And if you want to know more about the event, you can go to truckeeawards.com.
Teddy for something. I'm trying to think of something that he does well, and if I come up with something, I'll get back to you.
Jim, you do know that my grandmother was the only person that got away with calling me Ted.
Well, That's our favorite president, as you know, and we share that. So, well, thank you to our three speakers. We'll see you all next second Tuesday here, live, and then live, with any luck at all, in September. So thank you, and don't forget you can visit these programs or revisit these programs online. Thank you. See you later. Bye-bye.